All right, so today's video, I have to thank you guys for being patient. It's been a 5-month wait for me to answer these questions from my previous Q&A, so I appreciate all the patience. Before I get into the questions, I do have an announcement, and I'm actually going to be doing the channel full-time starting today. So this is my first video doing the channel full-time, and I have a hard time showing appreciation. I don't know how to say it properly, I don't know how to word it, but I do just want to say this channel has been just an absolute gift for me to be able to have this platform. I don't take it for granted, and I absolutely love doing it. I know through my monotone voice, it might not always seem that way, but I guarantee you it is. That's why I'm consistently down here a couple times a week, filming my videos, talking about my experience and my training methods to share with you guys. In an industry that so desperately needed a breath of fresh air, I'm trying to be that person. Natural bodybuilding, when I first started it, it was lonely. There's not a whole ton of people doing it. There wasn't much of a community or even like an industry. I don't like the term industry. I'll use community instead. It's been sorely lacking for years. And to see creators on here in the community, just how tight-knit it is and how much we're really bringing it back thanks to all the other noble natties and the rest of this community, it's been exciting to see, and it didn't feel right to not put my 2 cents in, and that's how the channel started. It was really as simple as that. So never in a million years did I think I'd actually be able to pursue the channel full time. So I have to thank every single one of my clients, all of my current clients, anybody that's worked with me in the past. It's been incredible, and there's no way that I'd be able to be here without you guys. So I do want to express my gratitude for that, and I want to dedicate myself in this channel to learning as much as we possibly can about natural bodybuilding. I'm treating it as an experiment for me to hyper optimize my training, learn as much as I possibly can, and just take time to reflect. So I'm actually building an office right to my left, no pun intended, with Miss Basement's dad. He is basically a legendary handyman and has taught me so much. So we've got an office set up here, got the gym on this side, and I'm going to be upgrading the channel. I'm going to keep it down to earth. I'm going to keep it more raw style, if that makes sense. Not a whole ton of fancy edits or whatnot, but I'm finally going to upgrade my iPhone. So I'll have a better camera, and I'll actually have storage to film videos that are long enough. So I'm going to be placing that order tonight. And I want to dedicate as much of my time as I can to developing natural bodybuilding and learning everything that I can and sharing it on this channel. So more edits are going to be coming, more frequent posts, more thought out and higher quality posts. I'm going to keep it, like I said, I'm going to keep it pretty raw still, like the way that I started and have done this channel this whole time, but it's going to be getting better is what I'm trying to say, to put it simply. So with that being said, let's actually get to the Q&A. First question from Aaron Dess. Do you think it's possible for someone to make better gains training 1 rep shy of muscular failure compared to going to failure, assuming that recovery is optimized and the set quality is the same? Potentially. This question's tough to answer because it depends on the lift and it depends on the program. So I know you mentioned recovery. So assuming the program's in check and recovery's in check as well, you can make great gains staying 1 rep shy of failure. The tough part is when you get into the nuance of the exercise selection, that answer is going to vary. So you take something like an RDL, where it's a bias in the lengthen position and the stretch position, and it's a hip hinge where you're just moving a ton of weight anyways. Something like that, you can create so much tension far enough from failure to where you don't necessarily need to go to failure. But then you take something like a cable lateral raise, where ideally it's better to actually go past failure and do partials after you hit full rep failure. This is a case where you're definitely not going to be making as good of gains 1 rep shy of failure as you would taking it actually into partial reps there. So it also does get a little bit tricky when you're comparing technique failure to actual muscular failure, which is a little bit tougher to measure for sure. I would say if you're looking at failure, it's going to vary from lift to lift, and this is going to be based on the muscle that's involved, upper body or lower body, the training equipment that you're using. So whether it's a machine, a free weight, whether it's an isolation or compound, the joints or joint involved in that movement. There's so many things that are going to change the outcome of this answer. So I would argue that there's a spectrum from 3 to 2 reps in reserve all the way to where you can barely even move the weight at all. But of course, the lifts are going to change depending on this proximity to failure. So there's no way to answer this simply, but I would suggest that you look at each lift individually. Next question from Alexander Rodriguez. I purposely hearted this one because he had another question from a previous Q&A that I didn't get to. So this is actually a pretty good question he has. Are bodyweight pull-ups and dips different movements than weighted pull-ups and dips due to the effect that the added weight has on your center of mass, specifically while using a weight belt? I find that once I start adding weight to my pull-ups, the movement, I can't stay the same and it feels very different. So basically what he's saying here is that as you add weight, your center of gravity is changing, because if you are, say, a 200-pound person and you're leaning slightly forwards in a dip or leaning slightly backwards on a pull-up, when you're adding weight to your hips, it's going to change the angle that your body's leaning at, and that changes the movement. So yes, it actually does change the movement. This is more applicable to isolation lifts. So that's why when you see somebody curling, say, the barbell for warm-ups, they can stay perfectly still and just curl like this. But when someone's curling 150 pounds, in some way, shape, or form, their body has to compensate, because when you're at a 90-degree joint angle, and let's say your forearm is 15 inches long, when you have 150 pounds 15 inches in front of you, it's going to pull you forward. So whether that's you shifting your hips back or leaning your chest back, or your hips forward and your chest back, kind of crunching like this, these all change the leverages of lifts. And that's why I think you see a lot of more advanced lifters do their isolation work, in particular on machines. And I don't know if everybody thinks about this, but you can kind of just feel it once you become more advanced. I noticed this in my own training, and I didn't understand it for the longest time, but the more I thought about it, the more I said, okay, well, if I'm 180 pounds and I'm curling 30 pounds in front of me like this, I outweigh that pretty significantly. But if I'm curling 180 pounds and I'm holding it 1.5 feet in front of me, of course it's going to pull me forward, so I have to adjust my center of gravity and lean back a little bit, and that, of course, changes the movement. It changes the tension curves, all these different things. That's why isolations with free weight especially feel tougher as you get more advanced. So it's a good question, and it's definitely something to think about. I don't necessarily know if it's always a reason to stop doing a lift in particular, but in some cases it is better to then shift into a machine where you have that extra support. Next question from Only Smash. What is your opinion on doing paused reps? Do you think taking the stretch reflex out of a movement is beneficial, as we can get more out of less weight and be more honest with form? Paused reps have pros and cons, and I don't like them, but I also don't dislike them. I think in most cases, I would probably choose to stay away from it, but this doesn't have to be all the time. So the biggest issue with paused reps, in my opinion, is when it comes to pushing movements or extension movements. So if you're doing, say, an overhead tricep extension or a Smith machine press, these movements, when you pause, you are eliminating the stretch reflex. We know that muscle is generally built more in the eccentric than the concentric, and when you get rid of the stretch reflex, you're getting rid of what helps you get through that weaker portion of the movement. So the way that I like to see a rep, the way that I track reps in my head, is how many quality eccentric reps did I get in that set. So when I do a set of curls, for example, most people, when they do a set of curls, they track it as, all right, so I got the bar up 12 times. But if I skip that last eccentric and I just say, all right, well, I got that 12th rep, and you just let it down because you got 12, in my head, I almost count that as 11. I don't actually record it that way, but that's my method of thinking when I'm doing a set. So when it comes to pause reps, the way that I see this is you generally don't want to eliminate what helps you get another eccentric. And the reason you're getting that eccentric, it's not directly from it, but it's because you can get another concentric. So the way I see it is that's your little boost to be able to get the eccentric, which is beneficial for building muscle. So in most cases, particularly in presses and extensions, I would steer clear of it. And that's not to say you can't ever do it, because I do think it can help in certain situations like technique and form, like you mentioned. But I think when it comes to pure muscle building, assuming you already have good form, probably a good idea to avoid pause reps, generally speaking. Next question from DC. Smith machines with the power rack included are sexy as hell and a space saver. I agree. What is your biggest home gym regret? That is a really good question. I'll have to think about that. I'd say the biggest regret that I have is probably the first squat rack I bought. The thing was probably 20 pounds. It was like a half rack. It was just super crappy. Like the bar, anytime you touched the bar, the rack would just move with it. And I think if you want to do any type of like moderate to heavy-ish weight lift, you don't want to have to worry about your rack slipping on you when you're re-racking the weight. So of course it worked, and of course it got the job done, but I paid $250 for it when in reality it was probably worth $50. Like not actually, but the value that I would have placed on is probably $50. So it got the job done, but I sold that thing pretty quick. I did end up making my money back, funny enough, but I don't recommend it. Maybe for someone that's using super lightweight or whatever, but yeah, I wouldn't recommend that little half rack I had. Next question is from, I'm not going to try and pronounce that. It's just a bunch of letters. 3 questions. I'm going to read all 3. I'll see which ones I'll answer. Would you recommend every beginner start with a 6 or 7 day routine? I personally think that no one can screw up this high frequency routine with 4 to 5 lifts per day. It keeps most people on track for the long run. I see you are an enjoyer of what I used as a beginner that I posted when I first started the channel. I wouldn't say it's best for most. I have a hard time saying it's best for most beginners. I think for people that struggle with consistency and benefit from implementing a habit into their day-to-day life, that it is beneficial to just do a couple lifts, but do them more often. So do less per session, but go into the gym more. I do recommend it. For most people, I would say no. Number 2, what would someone need to have done to be classified as an intermediate or advanced lifter? For example, doing 20 pull-ups in a row or maxing out on multiple machines. This is tough because I think for bodybuilding, I don't think we have metrics. I don't think we have metrics to measure this. And I don't necessarily like to have these labels. And the reason for that is because I don't think we actually have proper metrics to measure this. It's something that I think is a concept that can be helpful, but it's always going to be a gray area. And I don't have a method that I use to classify someone from beginner to intermediate to advanced. I will at some point. I imagine I'd come up with something that I'd probably share on the channel, but in the meantime, I would have to think about that a bit more. Number 3, Alpha Destiny. Well, now Alex Leonidas, since this video is 5 months old, classified intermediates as those lifters who have exhausted all the progress they can make from using linear periodization for the big compound lifts. Jeff Nippard classifies them by using strength standards according to how much you could lift compared to your body weight. What metric would you use? Yeah, I don't have one for that. I don't think it would be lifting number related or strength related, because I think that's a bit of a distraction from bodybuilding. And like you have someone like myself where I had a 1400 total at 180 pounds, and there's no way I was like an intermediate or advanced bodybuilder. No shot. And then on the other hand, you have people that maybe Jeffrey Verity Schofield, where no offense to him, but I think my total would blow his out of the water, and his arms are 18.25 inches. Like I'm not going to say he's an outlier and I'm an outlier, but let's be real here. Strength standards don't tell the whole story. Next one from Lacanian Lifter. Why might someone lose significant rep potential on a movement like weighted chin-ups after a long period of progression, for example, over 2 years? Nothing has changed for, say, body composition or diet. Baffled. It's been 2 years. Your progression is going to slow down. This is just the reality of lifting. If you could progress forever, that would be great, and that would be cool. Things are going to slow down, and at some point you're going to be quote unquote fighting for scraps, and that's just how lifting goes. I mean, this is where you could maybe get into the hypothesis of the like a desensitization and a resensitization to be clear, I'm not a believer in that. I think it's an interesting idea, but we have no proof that that's a real thing, and I am skeptical of it. But maybe at that point of progressing on a lift for 2 years, maybe there is some truth to it. Not entirely sure. I don't want to say that, but it's an idea to think about, maybe rotating the lift out. And I think at some point, I do think lifts might be able to get stale at some point. I don't know if it has to do with maybe your joints. It's something to think about. Maybe try rotating it out, seeing how it goes in the future. There, you might just have a weak link. I mean, the pretty straightforward answer I give you is you might have a weak link holding you back. So rotate the lift, make sure you're training every muscle, especially muscles involved in that lift, if that lift is training a muscle that's high priority for you. Next question from Z Design. What are your measurements, height and weight, and estimated body fat at the moment? I'm 5'9", 182, 17% body fat. That would be my guess. I know I'm 5'9", 182 though. Next question from Only Smash. What's your take on calf training? Reasons why most people struggle to grow them, and have you found any success training yours? Yes, there are multiple reasons why people can't grow their calves. One, because people doubt that you can actually grow your calves. Mindset, 100%, I do believe that. Two, because they're trained at the end of the session. This is what every advanced lifter says this as recommendation. Don't train them at the end of your session. That's valid. It's probably not new advice to you. If I had new advice to you, it would be slow down your eccentrics, hold the pause, whether it's half a second, 1 second, 2 seconds, even 3, 4, 5 seconds. Slow down the eccentrics, and I'm not just talking slow and controlled. I'm saying try like a 2 Mississippi, and not like a 1-2, like a start 1 Mississippi, 2 Mississippi, hit the full stretch, like an actual 2-second descent. I would also try lengthened partials past full rep failure and take those to where you can't even budge the weight anymore. Calf raises are a tough lift because it's just tough to generate that much force from extending your foot. It really is. So I think pushing these not just to technical failure, but to the point where you're about to shed a tear, like this is how I train my calves now. It's definitely a test of mental toughness, that's for sure. I've probably gained mental toughness from training them this way, but my calves have actually grown. The past 2 months, I've seen more calf growth than I ever really have, and it's from doing these methods that I just talked about. So that's my advice for you there. Next question from Texas Outdoor Fanatic. You are an OG on the channel. I've seen you, I think, on every Q&A. I have the ultimate question. Is there a logo on the front of your hat? And if so, what is it? Yes, it's bodybuilding.com. And I do actually want to find who makes this model of hat because it fits so perfectly. And I would actually want to make basement bodybuilding hats that are not a knockoff of this, but maybe that resemble it a little bit. We'll see. Let me know if you guys would be interested. Next question from Svea Reich. You're Swedish. I don't know how to pronounce that name. Never use dumbbells and barbells, or never use cables and machines. Also forgot to say, the way my Q&As work, leave your question in the comments of this video. When I make the next video, I'll go through and heart 10 to 15 comments that I really like, or heart a couple of the top comments as well. So leave your comment, whatever question you have for the next Q&A. If I like it, I'll give it a heart. If you get a lot of upvotes, I'll also give it a heart because clearly other people want to see the answer. So when it comes to free weights versus machine and cables, I would have to go with the machines and the cables for sure. The reason for this is because machines and cables can closely replicate what you can do with a barbell or a dumbbell more than a barbell or dumbbell can replicate what a machine or cable does, if that makes sense. So when I look at a lift like a one-arm dumbbell row, probably my favorite free weight lift ever, you can pretty easily replicate that just by using a cable, like doing a one-arm seated cable row. It's pretty close. But when you take something like a hack squat or a leg press, you just can't replicate that with a free weight. There's a lot of utility in machines and cables, and I think they offer more variety than a barbell or a dumbbell, even though those are more versatile, if that makes sense. So that's the way I see it. Most of my training is cables and machines. The only lifts I do consistently free weight are just one-arm dumbbell rows, bicep training. Pretty much everything else is on machines and cables. I just find that for myself in particular, it works a lot better for hypertrophy. And I think being someone that maybe isn't quite as responsive to hypertrophy training as I am strength training. Training closer to muscular failure is more beneficial than training to technical failure. I really have to dig deep. Machines and cables allow me to do that. They give me the stability to use heavy weight and push close to failure. Next question from CES, Chess, not sure how you pronounce that. My bad. Do you count hammer curls as bicep or forearm volume? Hammer curls I'd count as forearm volume, particularly as wrist extension, even though it's not a wrist extension movement. That's the category I would technically put it under. So any wrist extension movement or any movement that trains the brachialis primarily, I would put that under forearms. And then as far as your next portion of the question, it goes arms big upwards and gets thinner at the bottom when you do more bicep forearms than triceps and delts. So basically, if you have like a cone-shaped arm, yeah, at that point probably makes more sense to train, I would say, a lot of stretched wrist curls and finger curls, get the meaty forearm going down here. And I would continue to train triceps. I think training biceps to really just get your lower bicep and elbow area to puff out a little bit more would help balance that out. The way that arm wrestlers train, their forearms and their brachialis are jacked. Like you can't even see their elbow joint. Their arm is just one tube that's jacked that goes all the way up and down. I would do a lot of like arm wrestling style training to develop those muscles. I would keep training triceps. Delts you might be able to hold back on a little bit. They maintain size very easily. Getting them to grow is tough, but maintaining, if you're training chest and back, you're probably going to maintain your delts pretty well. So yeah, I'd say a lot of forearm and bicep work. Definitely keep with the triceps though. It's always a good idea to have big triceps. That's coming from someone that has a very hard time growing his, by the way. Next question from Derwin. How would you train after a flu? I've been so sick for a week and have zero energy to do cardio or to do anything. No appetite for eating either. I would do almost like a D-volume phase. So if you're doing 3 sets per lift on your program before, I would try going in, do 1 set, maybe 2 sets on some lighter lifts. This way, it doesn't take that much energy to just leave it all on the table for 1 set. You'd be surprised how fresh you feel after a week of just doing 1 set per lift, or even a session of just doing 1 set per lift. You're getting enough to maintain, if not build muscle and actually make progress in the gym, but you're not going to accumulate nearly as much fatigue. I actually just came off of like a D-volume week, and it worked pretty well. Just I had a few other things going on, and it worked out. I almost treat it as like a bodybuilder's type deload, if that makes sense, where I'm still in there getting the intensity, I'm training hard, the volume is just sliced back quite a bit. So that's what I'd recommend, and then slowly ramp up your volume again. But try and get the intensity, at least get what you can. Next question, last question from Theon E, another OG on the channel. Dr. Mike Isertel from Renaissance Periodization made a video on the topic of training as a natural versus as enhanced. He said there is nothing wrong in adopting a pump style training, 12 to 30 reps, as a natty, and in fact, both should train similarly. What's your take on this? So there is nothing wrong with this. You can train in 12 to 30 reps. There's naturals that have gotten jacked doing that. There's enhanced lifters that have gotten jacked doing that, of course. But that doesn't mean you should limit yourself to just those rep ranges. I think anything from 6 to 20 is probably a practical suggestion that covers most rep ranges on most lifts. I think certain deadlift variations you can get to maybe 4 or 5 and still have it be beneficial. A lot of this just comes down to pain tolerance, your cardio endurance, and your mental endurance as well. You don't want to be at the point in a set where you're at your 19th rep of a lateral raise and you're like, oh shit, like I'm not at muscular failure yet, but this hurts really bad and I want to give up and I'm out of breath. You want to find that fine line where you can select the rep range that works best for the lift based on its resistance profile and not get so high to the point where you start to fail for other reasons. So it's finding your proximity to failure and finding a rep range that works for your technique and the resistance profile of that lift. It's finding that sweet spot, pick a high end and a low end of that, maybe about 4 or 5 reps apart from each other, and use that as a little window to work in. That's the method I use, and it works very well. So with that being said, that's it for the video. Like I said, leave any questions below. I'll give you a heart if I like it, or if you get a bunch of upvotes that other people want to see an answer to, I'll answer those as well. So thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one.